plaza pulsed with energy. Balloons in the breeze, music in the air, and a crowd roaring as a little girl crushed the highest score on the screen. She didn't even flinch. Confetti flew. Applause thundered. The CEO himself stepped down from the stage, smiling, kneeling, holding out a toy car like a trophy. But the moment she spoke, the world seemed to pause. A hush swept through the crowd. The MC froze. The cameras lowered. "Sir, I don't want toys. I want a dad." And just like that, silence thundered louder than any cheer. Thousands had clapped for a game, but no one was ready for that sentence. And what happened next between a CEO, a little girl, and her mother would change three lives forever. The plaza was alive with noise, color, and excitement. Streamers waved in the breeze, speakers pulsed with upbeat music, and the scent of popcorn and cotton candy drifted through the air. Families gathered beneath bright banners. Laughter echoed as children darted between tents and booths, their eyes wide with wonder at the promise of prizes and games. Among the chaos stood a quiet figure, Rachel Monroe, her posture upright, her grip firm on her daughter's hand. Her faded blue coat was zipped to the top, though the air was warm. It wasn't just a barrier against the weather, it was armor. Armor against pity, judgment, and the weight of a world she never chose. At her side was Emily Monroe, age 6. Small, slender, and sharp-eyed, she wore a second-hand dress that barely reached her knees and a pair of scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. But her curiosity hadn't been dulled. Her gaze sparkled as she scanned the festival tents, her body leaning ever so slightly forward, pulled by excitement. "Can we look, Mama?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Rachel hesitated. These kinds of events weren't made for people like them, people who watch from the outside. But she noticed a sign: free games, free food, free books. A few volunteers nearby handed out sandwiches and juice boxes with cheerful grins. "Just for a bit," Rachel said softly. Inside the main tent, a man with a microphone hyped up the crowd. "Welcome to the launch of Brain Bounce, where fun meets learning." It was the grand unveiling of an educational app created by none other than Elias Monroe, tech mogul and media darling. His face was on posters everywhere, arms crossed confidently beside bright slogans about future-ready kids and next-gen learning. Rachel and Emily stood in the shadows of the crowd, unnoticed. Then, one of the volunteers knelt beside Emily with a warm smile. "Would you like to try a game?" Emily looked up at her mother for permission. Rachel gave a small nod. The tablet in front of her lit up. Bright colors, shapes, puzzles, word matches, numbers to drag and sort. Emily's fingers flew with surprising confidence. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even glance at the crowd gathering around. Her final score blinked across the screen in flashing letters. Top score achieved. Applause erupted. The MC shouted, "We have a new champion, ladies and gentlemen." The crowd parted. Stepping forward from behind the stage curtain was Elias Monroe himself. He wasn't what Emily expected. His tailored suit and polished shoes seemed out of place on the foam-padded floor, but his expression was kind, genuinely kind. He crouched beside Emily, holding out a small, limited-edition toy car with the Brain Bounce logo on its side. "You're amazing," he said warmly. "This is for you." Emily blinked up at him, her face calm, her voice soft. "Sir, I don't want toys." Elias paused, confused. "I want a dad." The entire plaza fell silent. The MC's hand dropped from the mic. Volunteers stood frozen, mid-step. A balloon escaped a child's hand and drifted skyward, unnoticed. Even the music stopped. Elias knelt there, the toy car still stretched out in his palm. His smile faded, not from offense, but from the weight of what had just been said. Emily didn't look ashamed. Her gaze was steady, sincere. Her tone wasn't dramatic. It was honest, gently devastating. Rachel's cheeks flushed. She quickly moved to her daughter's side, crouching low. "Emily," she whispered, her voice tight with embarrassment, "say thank you to the man." "But Mama," Emily said, eyes still locked on Elias, "I already have toys. I just want someone who stays." The silence deepened. A woman nearby reached into her purse and tried to hand Rachel a few folded bills. Another man offered a gift bag of snacks, but Rachel shook her head. "Thank you," she said quietly but firmly, "but I don't take what I haven't earned. We're just passing through. She wrapped her arm around Emily and turned to leave. Not hurriedly, not in shame, but with her back straight and her dignity unshaken. Elias watched them go. He'd spent his career building algorithms to predict what people wanted. Features, trends, engagement. But nothing could have prepared him for that moment. For a 6-year-old who didn't want rewards, just presence. For a mother who had every reason to ask for help, but didn't. He stood motionless as the applause died, as the crowd began to murmur again, as the toy car in his hand suddenly felt like the heaviest thing he had ever held. The echo of Emily's words stayed with him long after the tents came down. And that moment, simple, raw, and utterly unplanned, would become the one that changed everything. That night, Elias Monroe couldn't shake her voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it carved through his thoughts like a quiet truth that refused to be ignored. "Sir, I don't want toys. I want a dad." He stood alone in his penthouse, the city lights twinkling far below. A glass of untouched whiskey sat on the counter. His phone buzzed with texts from investors and congratulatory messages from the Brain Bounce team. But none of that mattered. One little voice had drowned it all out. She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg. She simply wanted what no fortune could buy. Someone who stays. Elias had spent his life designing systems to predict human behavior, to measure motivation and engagement. But nothing in his career had prepared him for a 6-year-old with clear eyes and a broken wish. The next morning, with barely a plan and no intention of being recognized, Elias pulled on a plain gray hoodie and walked. No driver, no security, no press, just silence. His feet led him to Willow Creek Park, a modest green space tucked between apartment blocks. No bronze statues or marble fountains here, just uneven benches, aging oak trees, and a playground with fading paint. And that's when he saw them again. Rachel and Emily. They were seated on a bench near a small fountain, sharing a sandwich wrapped in parchment paper. Rachel tore it in half carefully, handing the bigger piece to her daughter. Emily leaned her head gently against her mother's shoulder. They laughed at something, a joke only they understood. It was simple and utterly disarming. Elias froze. There was no spotlight, no stage, no applause. Just a mother and daughter finding peace in a moment that cost nothing. He approached slowly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low. Rachel looked up, startled at first. Her eyes narrowed slightly in recognition. "Mr. Monroe?" He offered a sheepish smile. "You can call me Elias." A pause, then a slight nod. She gestured toward the empty spot beside her. He sat down, careful not to crowd her. Emily looked up from her sandwich. "Hi," she said through a bite. "Hi, Emily," Elias replied. "That was quite something you said yesterday." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry if she—" "No," Elias interrupted, his voice firm but warm. "Don't be. She just told the truth." The three sat in a gentle hush, the morning air cool and sweet around them. The fountain bubbled quietly nearby. "You live around here?" Elias asked. "Not far," Rachel answered. "We come here when the weather's nice. She likes the ducks." Elias glanced at Emily, who now tossed crumbs toward a waddling group of birds. "You work?" he asked gently. Rachel nodded. "I do what I can. Cleaning, helping at local markets, sewing sometimes. It's not consistent, but it pays enough to keep us going." He nodded, then said softly, "It can't be easy." "It's not meant to be easy," she said. "It's meant to be worth it." Elias looked at her then, not as a struggling single mother, but as someone quietly powerful. Her words weren't defensive. They didn't carry bitterness, just resolve. There was something unshakable about her. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "If you don't mind me asking, Emily's father?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She watched her daughter skip toward the edge of the grass, then turned back. "He was my first love. We had plans. But when I told him I was pregnant, he panicked, left, never looked back." "I'm sorry," Elias said, meaning it. Rachel shook her head. "I'm not anymore. Because I got her, and I'm raising her the way I wish someone had raised me, with self-respect." Her eyes met his, steady, clear. I don't need pity, she said. And Emily doesn't need someone who shows up because they feel guilty. She needs someone who stays, someone strong. Elias didn't respond immediately. He just listened. He had spent his entire adult life in a world of surface-level charm, power plays, and polished personas. But this woman, this moment, it was real. Later that day, back at his office, Elias didn't review launch metrics. He didn't join strategy meetings. He sat quietly at his desk, thinking about a sandwich shared in a park, and the quiet dignity of a woman who refused help unless she'd earned it. Rachel Monroe didn't believe in shortcuts. She never asked for handouts, never hinted at her struggles. If kindness was offered, she responded with gratitude, but never entitlement. In the mornings, she and Emily returned to the same park. While other parents scrolled through phones or complained about rising costs, Rachel picked up candy wrappers left behind by careless hands. She straightened picnic benches when they were knocked out of place. She always carried an extra paper bag, not for herself, but for the mess others ignored. And Emily? She noticed. She followed quietly behind her mother, mimicking the movements, collecting small bits of trash, greeting the birds they fed crumbs to, saying thank you to the sun even on cloudy days. Rachel didn't give lectures about kindness. She lived it. One morning, Elias Onro watched from a distance as Rachel helped an elderly woman with a walker cross a bumpy stretch of sidewalk. She didn't ask if the woman needed help. She just stepped forward. No hesitation, no cameras, just instinct. Another day, Elias saw her help a vendor near the park stack plastic chairs during a sudden gust of wind. In return, the man handed her a small container of soup. She smiled, nodded, and insisted on helping clean his cart before leaving. It wasn't charity, it was quiet exchange. Elias had grown up believing strength meant building empires, negotiating billion-dollar deals. But watching Rachel made him rethink everything. That night, sitting in his office high above the city, Elias opened a folder from a nonprofit foundation his company had quietly funded for years. The Cornerstone Collective, which supported women re-entering the workforce. He typed an email to its director. There's someone I believe you should consider for editorial contract work. Remote, flexible hours. No mention of me. I'd like her to be offered the chance anonymously. He described Rachel not with titles or degrees, but with character, organized, observant, clear communicator. A week after Rachel submitted her third content review, a plain cardboard box arrived at her apartment doorstep. There was no return address, no company name, just a simple label. Early Learners Fund for Emily Monroe. Rachel knelt to pick it up, her brows furrowed in confusion. She hadn't ordered anything. The box wasn't heavy, but it felt full, with possibility or surprise she couldn't yet tell. Emily rushed to her side, eyes wide with excitement. Is it for me? Rachel nodded slowly. It has your name on it. Together they brought it inside and placed it on the floor. Emily sat cross-legged, practically vibrating with curiosity. Rachel carefully peeled back the tape and opened the flaps. Inside was a neatly packed bundle, a stack of vibrant picture books, classics and new releases, a brand new box of colored pencils in every shade imaginable, an activity journal with blank pages and soft prompts like, draw your biggest dream, and on top of it all, a letter, simple, typed, unsigned. Some children deserve every chance to keep dreaming. We believe Emily is one of them. Rachel didn't move. Her fingers trembled as she held the letter, reading it again, just to be sure it was real. Mom, look, Emily squealed, already pulling out the pencils. It's like my birthday. Rachel laughed softly, though her eyes shimmered with tears. She swallowed the lump in her throat and reached for one of the books, her thumb brushing the glossy cover. She didn't ask who sent it. She didn't try to trace it. She didn't question the generosity, because deep down, she knew. A few days later, a formal email followed, again unsigned but sent from a legitimate foundation. Emily had been awarded a 2-year scholarship to a private early learning center nearby. It included not only tuition, but also books, art supplies, and access to a weekend enrichment program. Flexible pickup hours, a focus on emotional development and creativity. Rachel sat in silence for a long time after reading it. Her instincts as a mother screamed to protect Emily from too much hope, from too many strings. But this wasn't pity. It was investment. Not in Rachel, but in her daughter's future. And she would honor that investment the only way she knew how, by working harder, by showing up, by giving more than was asked. That night, after Emily drifted to sleep, Rachel returned to her makeshift desk and reopened her latest assignment. She sipped her tea and began typing. Soft corrections, thoughtful rewrites, gentle improvements that made the material not only functional, but felt. She didn't know that across the city, Elias Monroe was reading the same reports with quiet pride. She didn't know it was him, but she knew this. Someone, somewhere, believed in her daughter, and that was more than she ever dreamed to ask for. Empathetic and quietly brilliant. A week later, Rachel received an unexpected email, a job offer. It was for part-time freelance work, reviewing and curating educational content for a children's learning platform. The tone was professional, the pay fair. The hours could be set around Emily's school schedule. Rachel stared at the screen. It seemed too good, but it wasn't a donation. It wasn't labeled assistance. It was a real role, with expectations and responsibility. She accepted. From the very first assignment, Rachel threw herself into the work. She reviewed every worksheet with care, flagged typos gently, and offered improvements that made the content more accessible and engaging for kids. Her feedback was insightful, always framed constructively. Her notes didn't sound academic, but rather deeply human, like someone who truly understood how a child learns. Because she did. She had Emily. Elias tracked her progress only through back-end reports, never intervening, never revealing his involvement. The editorial team assumed Rachel had a background in child psychology or early education. She didn't. She just paid attention. Each night after Emily was tucked in with a bedtime story and a glass of warm milk, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before her, tea steaming in a chipped mug. She stayed up past midnight sometimes, not out of desperation, but out of pride. She had been trusted, and she intended to be worthy of it. Elias from afar felt something shift within him. This wasn't about lifting someone up. It was about making space for someone who had always been capable, but was rarely given a chance to prove it. And for the first time in years, Elias felt more than admiration. He felt hope, not just for Rachel, but for himself. It was a Saturday morning like any other. Rachel and Emily were seated on their usual bench near the bakery, sharing a small fruit cup, their laughter mingling with the sound of bicycles and birdsong. The moment felt light, uncomplicated. Emily leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, pointing at clouds and inventing stories. And then the black car pulled up. The door opened with an intentional click, and a woman stepped out in cream cashmere and pearl earrings. Her heels clicked sharply on the sidewalk. Her hair was perfectly pinned, her expression cool and controlled. Margaret Monroe. Rachel looked up, instantly sensing the tension. She rose to her feet as the woman stopped just a step away. "You're Rachel, aren't you?" Margaret asked, her voice low but cutting. "I am," Rachel answered cautiously. "Can I help you?" "I'm Elias's mother." Rachel's stomach tightened. Margaret didn't wait. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I see right through it. A single mother clinging to a wealthy man. Classic." People nearby turned their heads. Emily looked up in confusion. Rachel instinctively knelt beside her daughter, shielding her body from the sharpness of the words. "You think street food and sweet eyes are going to secure your place? That you can climb your way into our family with sad stories?" Rachel stood, her voice quiet but steady. "I never asked your son for anything." "Oh, please," Margaret scoffed. "You didn't have to." Rachel took Emily's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. We're going." They walked away, her back straight, her grip on her daughter's hand strong. But before turning the corner, Rachel stopped. She turned around, locking eyes with the woman who had tried to shame her. "I may be poor," Rachel said, her voice unwavering, "but my daughter will not grow up believing she is less than anyone. We don't need charity, and we certainly don't need your approval." Then she walked away, dignified, head high, without a single tear falling until they were home and behind a locked door. For 2 days, Rachel ignored Elias's calls, not because she didn't want to hear from him, but because her heart was bruised and silence was the only thing she trusted. On the third evening, she sat alone at the park, her arms wrapped around herself as the sun dipped below the horizon. Then came footsteps. She looked up. Elias. "I'm not here to apologize for her," he said softly. "I'm here to tell you, I should have protected you from her, and I should have told everyone how much you matter to me." Rachel didn't speak, her gaze searching his. "You don't have to impress anyone," Elias continued. "You already are enough." The words fell between them like a promise. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. Instead, she let him sit beside her, in the quiet, where something broken began to mend. A few weeks passed. The air grew softer. The park turned golden. Life, in its quiet way, began to mend what had once been torn. Rachel and Elias didn't rush anything. They walked more, talked more, sat on benches while Emily chased butterflies and pigeons. There were no grand gestures, no diamond promises, just shared sandwiches, inside jokes, and the feeling of something slowly, gently becoming whole. One evening, they were in Rachel's tiny kitchen. The table was set with mismatched dishes, the smell of lentil soup in the air. Emily was humming in the bathroom, washing her hands before dinner. Elias had arrived with a loaf of fresh bread and a story about a childhood pet that chewed through everything in his house. The doorbell rang. Rachel wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door, only to freeze. Standing there was Margaret Monroe, not in pearls or judgment, but in a light beige coat, her graying hair in a soft bun. In one hand, she held a covered casserole dish. In the other, a small wrapped box with a red ribbon. For a long second, no one spoke. Then wordlessly, Margaret extended both gifts. Her face wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was, sincere, tentative. Rachel hesitated, then took the offerings with careful fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. Margaret gave a single nod and looked toward the sounds of laughter coming from inside the apartment. "You can come in," Rachel added quietly, surprising even herself. Dinner was quiet at first. Margaret sat stiffly in one of the chairs, looking around at the humble home. But there was no disdain in her eyes now, only observation, maybe even reflection. Emily unwrapped the small box and gasped. Inside was a simple cloth doll with golden yarn hair and a bright red dress. "She looks like Mommy," Emily giggled. Margaret cracked the faintest smile. Elias held Rachel's hand under the table. No words, just presence. After the meal, while Rachel washed the dishes and Elias dried, Emily tiptoed into the kitchen, tugging gently on Elias's sleeve. "Can I ask something?" she whispered. "Of course, Munchkin," Elias smiled, crouching down to her level. Emily cupped her hands around his ear like she was telling a sacred secret. "Now, can you be my dad?" Elias froze. He looked at Rachel, her eyes glossy, her lips parted in quiet emotion. She gave the faintest nod. His throat tightened. He reached out and kissed Emily's forehead gently. "Daddy is always here, Princess." Emily threw her arms around his neck with all the love her tiny body could hold. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and gold, the three of them walked through the park, Rachel holding Emily's left hand, Elias her right. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They paused near the swings, watching Emily run ahead, chasing fireflies. Elias turned to Rachel. "Are you happy?" he asked. She smiled, not the kind that fades quickly, but the kind that lives in the soul. "I'm peaceful," she replied. "That's more than I've had in a long time." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there as the breeze wrapped around them gently. No photographers, no headlines, no fanfare, just a man, a woman, a little girl, finally a family. In today's world, where success is often measured in wealth, titles, and online followers, stories like Rachel's remind us of a deeper truth, that dignity, presence, and love matter far more than luxury. Rachel didn't have riches. She didn't wear designer clothes or seek validation online. What she gave her daughter through small, consistent acts was far more powerful. Compassion, patience, and the example of a life lived with quiet strength. And Elias? He had everything money could buy, except meaning. until one little girl's words cut through the noise. I don't want toys. I want a dad. This wasn't just a story about a CEO or a struggling mother. It was a story about what it means to show up, especially when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. It challenges us to ask ourselves, in what ways do we measure worth today? Do we overlook real connection in pursuit of the superficial? Would we recognize someone like Rachel if she were standing right in front of us? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever met someone who changed your perspective with a single sentence? What does being enough mean to you? Your reflections might just inspire someone else today. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in kindness, presence, and second chances. At Warm Soul Stories, we believe every soul has a story worth hearing. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest truths.